Yeah, you're right. We don't necessarily have a traditional crime scene to analyze. Sometimes we kind of do. You may know that there looks like there was a cleanup in a house somewhere, but with Ashley's case, we don't have anything. We don't know where it happened. And so the focus has to shift more heavily on victimology, as you pointed out. Timeline reconstruction becomes critical, which is also difficult when you have a delay in reporting and a delay in law enforcement action. Makes it more challenging. And then we're also looking at the behavioral consistency as well, looking at Ashley's lifestyle, her routines, relationships, stressors, support system, the risks. I mean, this is all falling under the victimology and what was normal for her and what was not. And you talked about the victimology being important to understand why was this person selected? Why did they meet with foul play? Why did they become a victim of a violent crime? It's really important to understand that. Why were they selected? Because that why may tell you who. Maybe not exactly who, but, the vicinity. And then we're examining, in her case, and in many of these disappearances where foul play is believed to be involved, the statements of the people who were around her, especially those who were the last to see her, the last confirmed sightings. So even without a clear scene, these behaviors still leave some sort of pattern that we're looking at.
That's Julia Cowley, a retired member of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit and the host of the Consult podcast. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. There's a place in northwestern Montana where the continent divides itself, and the division is not subtle. Triple Divide Peak in Glacier National Park is the hydraulic apex of North America, the single point on Earth from which water flows into three separate oceans, the Atlantic, the Pacific, and Hudson Bay. Stand there, and the rain that falls on your left hand will reach a different ocean than the rain that falls on your right. The land itself cannot agree on where things belong or where they go. U.S. Route 89 runs north-south along the Rocky Mountain front for nearly 400 miles from the north entrance of Yellowstone to the Canadian border, linking 7 national parks across the Mountain West. Stanley Kubrick used the north shore of St. Mary's Lake, where it runs along the edge of the upper park, as the opening of The Shining, aerial footage of a car climbing towards something that cannot be escaped. Forrest Gump runs across it and says of St. Mary's Lake, it looked like there were two skies, one on top of the other. The road appears in postcards and film, in the imagination of everyone who has driven it and felt the particular sensation of a landscape that seems almost too large to be real. What the postcards did not show you is what lies just over the ridgeline to the east. On one side of the divide, Glacier National Park, curated wilderness, luxury lodges, helicopter tours, Instagram vistas, a going to the sun road that draws millions of visitors each year to a landscape managed for their consumption. On the other side of the divide is Browning, Montana, the heart of the Blackfeet Nation. Flat, windswept, shaped by a century of resource extraction, broken treaties, forced relocation, and the systematic dismantling of everything that might allow a community to protect itself. For the past 2 years, I've spent an enormous amount of time at the divide. It began when I heard the story of the disappearance of Ashley Loring HeavyRunner, a 20-year-old Blackfeet woman who wanted to help with a crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women before she disappeared right here at the Divide, and she became one of them in 2017. Coming off of a 4-part series with Julia Cowley and her partners, 3 other retired FBI profilers, I wanted to revisit Ashley's case with you. We've discussed it with Kimberly, Ashley's sister, in the past, with Ashley's friend and relative, Haley Omeasoo, who went into forensic science because Ashley went missing. And it's been a reoccurring theme in my interviews with missing persons expert Ed Densel and geographic profiler Doug McGregor. Long-term disappearances can be just as disheartening as they are uncommon. About 2/3 of missing persons cases are resolved in 24 hours, 85% in 1 week, and 90% in 1 month. Only 1% remain missing for more than a year. One of the powerful things about joining the team on the consult was the level of hope I felt coming out of those conversations. We did not solve the case, but what they did was help sort through the noise and prioritize avenues of investigation in a case that feels like it's missing some of the key ingredients needed for profiling. But in reality, as it turns out, it isn't. Today, we're going to have the opportunity to continue that conversation. Hey, Julia, I just wanted to thank you for coming on again. I really appreciated the opportunity to come on your podcast and meet Bob, Angela, Susan. You know, after having listened to you guys for so long and learned so much from you and really just enjoyed your process, it was a neat experience to be on the other side of it. And also a neat experience to do it on a case that I really cared deeply about. So I appreciated the opportunity. And, you know, I was telling you before, I walked out of that conversation, you know, I knew it would be great for you guys to review the case, but I walked out of that conversation with a lot of hope. I'm sure that's how lots of investigators feel coming out of a consult. But I also realized I have like another 2 years of work to do, which is also a good feeling because there were just so many good ideas that came out of it. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. We're happy to have you on the show. And you're not the only person who's walked away from a consult thinking, oh, I have a lot more work to do. Or, I mean, sometimes they're like, you're dead wrong. And that was terrible. Other times, maybe they're inspired. But, you know, we don't always get a positive reaction.
Yeah. Well, I think I mentioned this in the episode. It reminded me a lot of, you know, when I was reporting at the Times, you know, when we would work on a long investigative story, one of the things that would normally happen, a group of editors who weren't a part of your project or sometimes some other reporters would sort of ask you questions about the work you had done that far. And you would think, like, we're 90% there. That's when that meeting is supposed to happen. And then you'd come out of it and be like, okay, we're 50% of the way there. And I really like that. And, you know, I think part of the reason why your podcast is so powerful, I think, and, you know, I know this from my experience with journalists who have listened to it or experts or other people, is it really does provide some actionable ideas in the sense that you're never going to answer who did it, or maybe you might at some point, but you're certainly going to point people in some really solid directions to look into. You know, but I have like 5 pages of notes, so.
I think the thing I like the best about our process is that, and I say this all the time, I use this terminology all the time, is we cut out the noise. You know,
Yeah.
let's look at what really is most probable, because sometimes investigations can lead you down rabbit holes investigating things that are not very plausible. And so where do we want to spend resources limited resources often with some of these departments, and let's look at what's the most likely thing that happened and spend our time there. And I think that's what I like about our process. And I can't do it on my own. So it's nice to hear my colleagues reinforce, hey, this is not likely to have happened. Let's look at it this way. And for me, approaching a case that is extremely valuable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I certainly saw it in our discussion. I remember one moment where I had brought up an idea, and I think it was the idea of it was related to someone sticking to a story for that long after so many search warrants and ending up in so much trouble. And you guys threw out that, like, sort of that, come on, what are the odds of that? Right? What is the, you know, likelihood of it playing out that way? And I think that those moments are super clarifying. And one of the challenges in Ashley's case, at least for me, and I see this in a lot of cases, where it may not be a domestic related disappearance, or it might, someone else may be involved, that often there are almost too many suspects. And that process of clearing out the noise, I think for me, and I think this is true in Ashley's case, doesn't necessarily tell me who did it, but it certainly tells me what direction I should prioritize things based on what's plausible. And I thought that part for me was really, really, really powerful.
Right.
And and it was, of course, just neat to see those minds in action. And,
these brilliant minds.
Yes,
of ours.
very, very brilliant minds.
Thinking very deeply.
You guys could be a lot of things, but dummies you are not.
We can be sometimes. We have a fun time, working together too. As you saw, we really enjoy our time together and always have. So we do have a good time, and we not only learn from each other, but we make each other laugh too.
Really good rapport. Yeah, that's some feedback I actually got about the episodes. Some of my listeners who listened, particularly to the first episode, really did like the lighthearted moments. They really did like.
I heard that too, and
okay.
I don't usually keep lighthearted moments in, but I think one listener said it was like sitting at the dinner table, listening to the conversation in the best possible way.
Mm.
And it might, I have been told sometimes we like those lighter moments. And I'm really careful because we do have those lighter moments. You have to. It's how you get through this kind of work. But you also have to balance that and be cognizant family members are listening. And, one of the things we never do is we never disparage anybody.
Right.
Our lighthearted moments are mostly because we're laughing at ourselves.
Right? Yes, right.
Some mistakes we've made, and that just happens. But but it's, you got to be careful too.
Mm-hmm.
We're really not in the room at BAU where it's not being recorded. This is being recorded. People are listening. Family members are listening, and friends. And you have to be really cognizant of that. So I thought that the lighthearted moments in that case were important to leave in.
Yeah. And I know that Ashley's sister, Kimberly, has listened to the first 2 episodes and was really thrilled about it. She actually posted it on the page. And I was glad to be able to give that to her too, and the ability to sort of think through. And she was saying to me that she's really looking forward to getting to our conclusion. And I said, well, I don't think we ever really get to a conclusion, but we certainly give you a list of where to look in the order to look.
Yeah, and that's the reality of behavioral analysis. Sometimes it can answer questions, but we're not identifying an offender. We're not solving the crime. We are hopefully having a good discussion about behavior and what it likely means, what it's most likely to mean anyway, and giving those ideas and prioritizing things. I mean, it's a way to attempt to move a case forward, to bring some clarity to some confusing issues in each case that's all we really can do. We can't, it's not magic. It's not,
Right.
oh, we have the answer. And I hope our show has sort of brought the reality to what behavioral analysis can and can't do, because I think there's two mindsets, and I know you and I have talked about this, that it's somehow going to solve the crime or it's complete nonsense.
Right.
And I like to say it's somewhere in between there. Maybe closer to helping to solve the
Solve the
crime of
crime.
being complete nonsense, but it it's not always going to answer all the questions. Unfortunately, I know people want us to have definitive opinions and say this is what it is and be completely certain, and we can't be.
Right.
Behavioral analysis is not 100% accurate.
And sometimes to your point there, sometimes the utility is the extra questions you leave us with, which I know may not always be satisfying for audiences, but I think that's actually some of the power. Like, oh, we haven't looked behind door number 4, or, maybe we should check this other thing out, or we don't have the answer to this. Having this would be really important. But I think it makes clear. It makes it clearer for me watching your process and watching you guys do that, what the real utility is. That it sort of it spurs an investigation forward. It helps point in a world of limited resources. Everything we have limited resources in everything we do. It prioritizes them in a way that can increase the odds of solving things. But, I had mentioned this to you before. One of the things that I had wondered about in a case like Ashley's was whether criminal profiling could really be impactful. And, we've talked about that idea of victimology being one part of the stool, really understanding who a person was and what was going on in their life, and, what experiences they've had, what their personality was like, what their motivations, all those things, um, really help you understand how they are selected as a victim. And then, the crime scene gives you tons of clues about the behaviors of the offender. And I had sort of thought to myself, and I would recommend the conversation we had on victimology during that episode to anyone who wants to know anything about it. But the thing that I had wondered was, with just the victimology and without the crime scene, could you really get constructive information? And it sounds like we did. And I'm just curious about your thoughts on how profiling can be beneficial in these types of cases, like missing persons cases like Ashley's.
Yeah, you're right. We don't necessarily have a traditional crime scene to analyze. Sometimes we kind of do. You may know that there looks like there was a cleanup in a house somewhere, but with Ashley's case, we don't have anything. We don't know where it happened. And so the focus has to shift more heavily on victimology, as you pointed out. Timeline reconstruction becomes critical, which is also difficult when you have a delay in reporting and a delay in law enforcement action. Makes it more challenging. And then we're also looking at the behavioral consistency as well, looking at Ashley's lifestyle, her routines, relationships, stressors, support system, the risks. I mean, this is all falling under the victimology and what was normal for her and what was not. And you talked about the victimology being important to understand, why was this person selected? Why did they meet with foul play? Why did they become a victim of a violent crime? It's really important to understand that. Why were they selected? Because that why may tell you who. Maybe not exactly who, but, the vicinity. And then we're examining, in her case, and in many of these disappearances where foul play is believed to be involved, the statements of the people who were around her, especially those who were the last to see her. the last confirmed sightings. So even without a clear scene, these behaviors still leave some sort of pattern that we're looking at. And the goal is to determine whether the circumstances are more consistent with a voluntary disappearance, an accident, or foul play,
Right.
and narrow that, I guess, corridor, so to speak, of possibilities from there. And, we sort of started out with Ashley's case of assuming foul play. Law enforcement has said there's foul play. They believe it. I think we believe it,
Yeah.
just based on the patterns and the complete drop off in communication, which is unusual, and nothing to indicate that she would have run away. Is it possible an accident? That is a secondary possibility, but we kind of started a place that this is likely foul play. So that's kind of how you approach a case when you don't have a clear crime scene. It definitely makes it more difficult, for sure.
Yeah. And so you had mentioned things like the timeline, things like the victimology matter more, or not matter more. You have to go even deeper into them in cases like this. Could I just ask you guys, from a process perspective, when you were looking into Ashley's case, what does your process even look like? I dumped the files on you, and then, because one of the things I'll tell you, I was surprised, and I said this after we got off the call. I was like, clearly they read everything I wrote, or at least between the four of them, every word, because they're
And
telling
then
me
some.
yes. And I was like, and clearly they've tapped into a ton of other resources that I know aren't mentioned in what I wrote, but I know where they are and where they came from. And I'm like, man, so what is that process like?
It's different for each of us, I think. I think some, we just start with, okay, what was the first document I was given? For me, a case like this is much more difficult because I always start with the crime scene.
Right.
That is my expertise. And to not have a crime scene it makes it much more challenging for me. Some people start with victimology. I don't like to start with victimology because I don't want to be influenced when I'm looking at the behavior, at a crime. I want to look at the victimology second, which is why. Yes.
After you know
So,
the crime.
that's how I start. I just kind of, start with, in Ashley's case, the timeline from the beginning, when she went missing, what witnesses say. That's basically where I started. And then go to her victimology. And that's and I'm sure that's similar to what the others do in as far as reading through the materials. But you have to really, in every case, you have to immerse yourself in the information, and you have to be open-minded, which is why I don't like to start always with victimology. I really want to understand, what do I think actually happened here? And then victimology is like, okay, now I see where the risks are. And then I don't put the cart before the horse, I guess, so to speak. And I think the reason we sound so thorough is because you have like four sets of eyes. You don't, you have one person, that one person's not going to catch everything. There's always something that somebody will say. I'm like, oh, I forgot about that. You're right. And they focused on something. So you have these four sets of eyes with different experiences, different perspectives, all looking at the same case. And that's why you can't just do it by yourself. I can come in and say a few things, but having another colleague, at least one other colleague there, and then having the three of them there, it's so much better.
Yeah.
Because you are not going to miss anything.
Right.
You're going to catch those things that I may not catch. You may read something different. You may see something in a different perspective. You may have had a case similar, or a circumstance that's similar, that you can draw upon. Your experiences are very valuable, and we all have different experiences. So, being I think just generally being patient, being detail-oriented, we all are, and we all have our strengths that we bring to the process. So that's why it seems it's easy to be thorough when you have 4 people looking at a case.
Seems is.
Well, I will tell you that I will start we all come in to a consultation having reviewed all the material, and I will think I have it all under control. Like, I know what happened here. Well, you know what I mean.
Yeah, totally.
No, but you know,
You
I
have your
come in with
hypothesis, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like I have a good understanding, and then somebody will throw something out there, and it will change what I'm thinking, or it will clarify.
Yep.
And sometimes I do come into cases where I'm like, I don't know. I'm really not. You just have these moments where just you get it. You're like, I think I got it. I think I got something good here. And the other times you're like, I really am not able to make heads or tails of why the offender did this. And somebody else will be able to clarify why they think the offender did that. And that's when it all comes together.
I got the impression, and this was one neat thing about being on this side of it, because I think I'd gotten this impression before listening to you guys. I felt like for all 5 of us, when we got on, our views were evolving as the others were putting input in it. I felt it internally, by the time we got to the final episode, I was like, my views on this case I've been looking into for 2 years have shifted significantly where I think the focus needs to be. And I was wondering if the experience is like for you come in with that potential hypothesis or maybe no hypothesis, but let's say you do have one. Does it evolve? Did it evolve for you on this case as the
Very much so. This one, I think, when we finished the last episode and we weren't recording anymore, I said that was really good. This is one of my favorite consults we've done on the show. And that was because I really did evolve based on conversations with all of you. And maybe this is not going to be the favorite analysis we've done for our listeners, but for me personally, it was because of that very reason. And I got to the end of that because I kind of came in, like, disappearances are not my forte. It's just not. I'm really much better with homicides where there's a crime scene and typically if there's a shooting. I don't know why those just tend to be where I feel the most comfortable. And maybe a stabbing too. But disappearances are just something I go into a bit uncomfortable. And maybe because, we don't have the crime scene, and that's what I spent my life a part of, going to crime scenes.
Right, even before you were a profiler and before you were an FBI agent.
I am very comfortable at crime scenes.
The scene,
mm-hmm. And not having that available to me makes me a little uncomfortable. And being the host of the show and trying to lead a disappearance, a missing person case is daunting. And where I come away with is how much support I get from the others. And I may go in feeling like, I don't know if I'm going to do the justice to this. I don't know if I'm going to be able to provide any clarity in this case. But because of the others and because of you, I felt like I had some clarity at the end of the 4-part series. And I mean, I credit that all to our conversation. And I'm very proud of that series. Yeah. Even though it's one of the more challenging cases. No body homicides are definitely the most challenging. And even though it was, I'm just very proud of that 4-part series.
Yeah. Yeah. And I felt the same way. It's hard as somebody who is both on it and listening to it, but I think I have the ability to be objective, and in a way maybe more objective because I tend to I think be critical of myself when listening. But I really did feel good about the conversation. I really felt like it was on the same level as some of some of the best sort of consults you guys have done when you brought a guest on. And, I can tell you some of my evolution. I was in the camp of, Paul Valenzuela in the case, is in my mind, if you were to pull a rap sheet, he's the best suspect. Like if you had nothing else, just a rap sheet, he's the best suspect. You could make a scroll out of his criminal offenses, but I felt like this is one of those cases where the best suspect probably isn't the person who did it. And then you have another suspect in Tashina Eastwood Running Crane who, certainly seems to on some days want to make it sound like she did it, and then on other days wants to make it sound like she's persecuted for it. I should step back and say that Sam McDonald is a 50-year-old man who, claimed, that in the days after Ashley stopped communicating with her family and sort of disappeared from her normal social circles, that he spent about 6 days with her and tells this sort of wild, and as you pointed out, Julia, chaotic story about her staying at his cabin. He alluded to the idea of having a sexual relationship with her. He alluded to her leaving and running away, but he didn't come forward even after she was missing. And then, once rumors started to spread and some of Ashley's relatives had heard these stories that he was telling, he then came forward to law enforcement with a story that I think a lot of people, you know, uh, thought was suspect. And another element toward the end of the month after she had disappeared was that rumors started to spread and made their way back to law enforcement that there was a man on US 89 in the Divide who was chasing a woman on that last night that Ashley really had communication with her family. So we explored Sam. We also explored Paul Valenzuela, who, was another sort of older man, about 20 years plus older than Ashley, who may have been in a romantic relationship with her. And we also explored Ashley's cousin, who was Paul's wife at the time, Tanisha Running Crane Eastwood. All people that people have explored as potential suspects. But, Sam is one that I've actually had a conversation with. And then you have Sam McDonald with a story that makes no sense. And I've always felt there's just too much of a plethora of good suspects in this case. And that I just think it really clouded my thinking. And one of the neat things about the conversation with the challenges and the questions, it just really brought me to that idea that, the space between the party she was last seen in Sam's cabin, that's the area. Those are the two spots that really need to be focused on. And I walked out with a measure of clarity despite all the information in my head, some validation too on some levels. Because of that, I think there's a real big camp that wants it to be Paul because of the rap sheet. And I'm just curious, how do you push that noise out? Because for me, yes, his criminal record is relevant. What's in his criminal record is relevant. I think one of the things for me in his criminal record, it's really long. There was one domestic incident, but there wasn't a lot of all of his stuff was very similar, sort of petty kind of grievances. But there's a big camp that really, because he fits the cliche of bad guy, if that makes sense, want to lean in that direction. How do you push that stuff out to make sort of a balanced?
You have to look at the underlying behavior of his criminal history. What needs is he serving when he's committing those crimes? Is it similar to what we think may have happened to a victim? So you may have a really bad person, and just because they're a bad person doesn't mean they're your offender. You really do have to dig deep into figuring out, okay, what is exactly is his criminal history? And does he have similar offenses or offenses that are serving the need
The same
that is
need.
similar to what we're seeing in the crime itself? And I'm just talking generally.
Generally.
Yes. So that's what you're looking at. Not just that, oh, he's got a long criminal history. It's like, what is that history? What does that tell us? And not just his criminal history, but his personal history as well. Because a lot of things may not make a criminal charge, but you need to know how, and so I wouldn't necessarily say he's got to be completely crossed off the list.
Right. No.
You got to do, using the general assessment questionnaire and figure out what is his personal history, his interpersonal interactions with other people. Is there violence there, and what spurns that violence, and what does he do, and what makes him mad? All those types of things. And so I think that's how you have to approach the case, because somebody at a surface level that may look like a good suspect, when you really look at him, like, this doesn't really fit with what we're seeing. It doesn't mean with 100% certainty he didn't do it, but I think I see so many cases too where there's just people think they have a really good suspect, and then when you look at really the crime itself and then that person's history, you're like, they've never done anything like this before.
Right.
They may have assaulted somebody, but what were the circumstances of that assault? Right. Is it sexually motivated or not? Those types of things that you're trying to weed out, not just like, oh, these got assault and battery charge. Well, what's the underlying story to that? What's the narrative? What does the police incident report say?
And it's, without bringing up any particular case, I do think in true crime, one of the things people struggle with, whether it's like an innocence case or it's a case like this one, is that the desire or whatever it is where, I think we make leaps in logic about the links between past behavior and criminal behavior. And I think part of it is, there are all these sort of cliches that we build about what the bad guy's like versus what the good guy is like. And then there are people like Chris Watts, but but I think that people just really struggle with that concept that not every bad guy did the crime that you're talking about or would ever do that particular crime. You had mentioned something earlier about, the difficulties of a case like this one where law enforcement response is delayed. In this case, it took 8 months before the FBI was called into the case. But one of the things I was thinking is an advantage for you guys as people who are from the behavioral analysis unit is that sometimes you guys drop into cases long after. In a perfect world, you'd want to be there near the beginning, but you have that experience of coming in afterwards and being able to sort of rewind the tape and say, guys, did anyone check that alley? Did anyone look over there? And I thought that was really, really interesting to an interesting sort of skill or advantage you guys have, that experience of coming in later.
Yeah, I think many times we're looking at cases that are old. They're cold cases. Law enforcement starts off and they are running down every lead and they're go, 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 go. And then they're not getting anywhere and it languishes. And eventually they're like, well, let's go to BAU. Let's see what they say. So we often do come in. And for us, we need that, because if you come in too soon to a case, we're just going to be asking for everything that you probably don't have yet. Right. We need to know the autopsy results. We need to know the results of the laboratory testing. And is there DNA here? Is there foreign DNA that doesn't belong to the victim? We need to know all those things. The more we know, the clearer picture we can get as to what happened. So coming in too soon, we may be able to give a lot of different ideas and a lot of, they're going to have to go back out and continue investigating. A lot of it too will be, we need more victimology. We need these interviews done. Here's a GAQ, use them, ask these questions of all the people that knew the victim. So bringing us in too early can sometimes, it just doesn't always work. So we are at an advantage coming in a little bit later. Now, during the investigative process, obviously you want investigators starting as soon as possible. So you don't necessarily need BAU as soon as possible.
But yes, right.
But you need investigations starting as soon as possible. And that did not happen in this case, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think that challenge of not having experienced investigators, and I don't even mean necessarily that you need to have homicide experience, but just investigative experience working the case early, I think was a real sort of hindrance to it. And I mean, ultimately created moments where I think there may have been, and I don't know for sure, missed opportunities to find evidence, missed opportunities to pin people into certain stories and other things along that line. Over the course of my sort of researching the case, I've gotten way more than I thought I would get, but insight into at least 5 of the agents who work the case. And I've been able to, some of it from public records, some of it from other places. I've been able to see some of the really cool things that these agents did and tried. Unfortunately, when the FBI got called in, the agent who took the case at that point had just arrived in Montana too. So he had come from Newark to Montana like a month before the case. So he hadn't really built his network and did a good job of sort of like trying to, build a network. But he did some really sort of creative things. Some of the agents who are working on, task forces in the area, on drug trafficking and other issues like that, really did some neat and creative things. But I do wonder, because I don't know whether anyone picked up the phone, or I don't 100% know. I'm pretty sure no one picked up the phone and called BAU on the case. For investigators, I could see how they might have the same sort of view that I had walking into this, that what's BAU going to do to help me on a missing persons case or a no-body homicide? Is there sort of like any message you would have for them about when the right time is, or whether it can be helpful, or what signs they might look for?
I think you know it when you see it. Like if you get to the point where you don't really have any more leads coming in, and you may think you have a suspect. You may think that, but you just can't get it over the line, or you maybe don't have any suspects at all at this point, and you need some clarity, or you need interview strategies. Like, how am I going to interview these people? There's always something that the behavioral analysis unit, I believe, can offer in some way, shape, or form. I've never sat in on a case that we can't help you at all, unless they just don't have any information. It's too early on. That might be like, we need more information. But, I don't understand people who say we don't need any help. Why not just have another set of eyes that are looking at it from the outside, and then the thing is, we're not out there doing the interviews. We do have to rely on the investigators' instincts and things like that, because we're not always part of those. We don't get to see all those interviews if they're not recorded or something like that. But, we are really very unbiased when we're reviewing everything. So you just never know what value it might be. And I do think we've had many detectives that came into a consultation without high expectations that left feeling like, that was worth my time. And we've had a couple here and there that I thought that was a waste of time. It's true, but more often than not, in all seriousness, most often they leave thinking it was well worth their time.
The world is buzzing with AI tools, but instead of making things easier, they've made your workflow overwhelming. You're stuck copying and pasting, context switching, and juggling too many apps. There's now a better way that outsmarts the work chaos. Meet Superhuman, the AI productivity suite that gives you superpowers everywhere you work. With Grammarly, Mail, and Coda working together, you get proactive help across your workflow, from writing to preparing for meetings, presentations, and so much more. Think of Superhuman as your AI dream team, proactively helping you go from to-do to done faster. Superhuman knows what you might need and offers suggestions whether you're drafting emails, creating documents, or more. It guides you in the moment so you sound like your best self and stay focused on what matters. There are even specialized agents designed to collaborate seamlessly and amplify your impact. Unleash your superhuman potential today. Learn more at superhuman.com/podcast. That's superhuman.com/podcast.
And so my answer is just, why not? We're not going to hurt anything. We're not involved in the investigation. We're not going to hurt your investigation. And whatever we say, whatever conclusions we may come to, take it or leave it. Maybe we'll say something that resonates with you, and maybe we won't, but why not try?
I don't think I told you this. Speaking of BAU helping out, you had mentioned the general history questionnaire before. I've actually
general assessment.
Yeah, general assessment. The questionnaire, which is sort of like the survey. You can explain better than me, but the survey that you send out. Well, so I've printed it out, and it's actually in my reporting bag to ask people questions when I'm doing the victimology and when I'm doing other things like that. It is a great tool.
And sometimes we're not necessarily looking at the answers to the specific questions. We're looking for the underlying behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just give an example. I had a case where somebody was describing how a victim was a school teacher, and she was thinking about leaving her career and doing something else, focusing on her artwork. And this was a very tough decision for her to make. And she'd gone to school to be a teacher. She'd majored in education, but she loved doing her artwork. And that was just something that was noted in the general assessment questionnaire. Well, you're not just looking at, okay, she was struggling with this decision. What you're looking at is, look how conscientious she was. You're looking at that underlying characteristic, not just the surface level. She was struggling with, she might not want to be a teacher anymore after all that work.
Mm-hmm.
Now she wants to go, do her artwork. That's not what we're looking at. We're looking at, this was a real struggle for her. And she hadn't maybe mentioned it to a lot of people. She maybe mentioned it to one close friend, but it just showed me, look how conscientious. Like, this was not something, she was not frivolous. She was not going to say, I did, all this schooling and education, and I'm just going to toss it aside and go do my artwork. No, this was a very difficult decision for her. And so that's what we're looking at when we're asking these questions with the GAQ, kind of the underlying, what is this telling us about this person? What is this incident? Or what is this situation that this particular victim or whoever the GAQ is about is facing, and how they feel about it? What does that tell us about them?
Mm-hmm.
And how they might react?
Yeah, about their values, their personality, from that small story. Even something like, if we were to twist that in a different direction, that she had made the decision, but she was struggling to tell a person, tells something about her agreeableness or her, desire to avoid certain kinds of conflict. And it may not even be the direct thing that the person is trying to answer, but you might pick up that pattern across different questions with different people. You In one of your recent episodes, you had this great conversation on the consult with Tad Tobias about no-body homicides. He was a federal prosecutor in D.C., where, and I think a lot of people don't know this, D.C. is one of the few places, other than probably reservations, where U.S. attorneys handle a number of homicide cases because D.C. doesn't have its own local prosecutor to handle serious crimes. And it was really interesting to listen to you guys talk about that. And it's an episode I would recommend for people. But, one of the things that was really interesting to hear, and I've heard about this before, about the success of no-body homicide cases. I remember the first one that I ever covered. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Sante Kimes and Kenneth Kimes. They were in New York, and
is that mom and son?
Yep, mom and son pair. They had moved into the house of a Upper East Side socialite just off of Central Park, and she disappeared. They got a conviction on that one. And, so I'd paid attention to the statistics over the years that suggested that if, investigators collect the right amount of information, these cases can actually get convictions. But it was interesting to hear you talk about the role that profiling could play in no-body homicide cases where the person is, likely gone. And you have to skip that part as a prosecutor where you're proving that the person has actually sort of died in the traditional sense. But I'm curious for you, like, as a profiler, how do you approach those cases? And also, in particular, I was sort of thinking about, approaching those cases, when I guess, do you need to have a suspect in those situations to profile it? Or do you think a profiler can be beneficial without it? Or
I don't think you have to have a suspect because, sometimes where you are trying to determine the nature of the disappearance. Did this person just walk off? Is it voluntary? Or did they meet with foul play? Is it an accident? And I think most of the time, I think it's accidental. I think you have to double check with Ed Densel. He's got his list going. But, and just for your listeners, Ed Densel does Unfound podcasts, and he focuses exclusively on disappearances. So I just want, it's not just no-body homicides or cases involving foul play, but, that's what you're trying to determine. And with no-body homicides, they're very unique because you have to actually prove a crime occurred. That that's what we're trying to show initially, which is a hurdle that you don't have when you actually have a body and that they died by unnatural cause, by homicide. This is, you're trying to show and that the person basically ceases to exist. And that's how I was taught by somebody at BAU who had an expertise in these types of cases, how to approach them. You're trying to show that this person ceases to exist. And looking at all the things we had talked about at the beginning of this episode about the behavioral patterns, and it becomes a complete circumstantial case. And those cases can be very strong, as Tad discussed, because circumstantial evidence, we think is weak evidence. And it's really not.
It's the strongest. DNA.
It is the strongest. All forensic evidence is, the way I was taught about evidence, and I'm not an attorney, but I've taken some legal classes, it's evidence where you have to make an inference from.
Yep.
You have to infer something happened. So if somebody leaves their DNA at a crime scene, you have to infer that they are likely the offender, depending on where it's left and what the source is and all of that. But you have to infer. And whereas, contrast that with direct evidence, which would be eyewitness testimony,
Notoriously unreliable.
Terrible.
The worst.
I don't know how many episodes I pointed this out in our show, but that is some of the weakest evidence, but yet we think of a case with direct evidence as being so strong. Not necessarily the case. So if you can put together a really strong circumstantial case, and that's another thing we do when we are analyzing cases, we're going through and we're looking at the evidence and we're evaluating how strong it is. Not only based on our own experiences and what we know about that particular type of evidence, but what we know about the research, what we know about statistics, all of that comes into play. And we evaluate how strong is this? And you put it into a category. And so sometimes with these no-body homicides, they are extremely thorough investigations because you are going back and you're looking at every single thing involving that victim to see, did that area of their life just stop? Did it stop one day? And oftentimes with the no-body homicides, you do have a suspected scene. You don't always, but that can help. Is there evidence of a cleanup? Did somebody, as Tad DeBise pointed out, did somebody go buy cleaning supplies? Check the stores. And so, that's the benefit of sometimes these no-body homicides is that, and the lies, that was something else, is that you are evaluating the lies. Why are people lying when they shouldn't be? Now, could there be a reasonable explanation for why somebody's telling a lie? It's because people do lie in important situations, but there are sometimes lies that make no sense, or they're telling a different story from one person to the next person. And those become critical, and we don't give them enough weight.
I think there was another great point that you guys made too about how, probably for investigators, certainly as somebody who's a journalist and somebody who's worked in clinical psychology, I am totally desensitized to lying. I mean, it's like, oh, someone's lying. No joke. And I look at Ashley's case, and that's one of the things for me that was kind of interesting about being on the other side of the profiling conversation. Like when we were talking about some of the things in the story related to Sam that feel like lies or improbable things. I look at that and I say to myself, well, of course he was lying. Everybody lies. That's what they do. Everybody lies. But I wonder if I were thinking about it from the perspective of a juror looking at those lies and the story that those lies tell, I might see it in a completely different way. And I agree with your point about circumstantial cases tell better stories. Because you have to tell a narrative, because the collection of the circumstantial evidence to prove something happened, especially when you're trying to prove that a person's actually died, it becomes a very, very, to me, powerful narrative. I love the example that Tad used about the idea that you go to sleep at night, and you or you go to bed at night and you look out the window and you see snow, it snowed. And, you go to bed at night, it hasn't snowed. You wake up in the morning, it's snow. You can infer that it snowed. And the example I always use, which is slightly different, is yes, it is theoretically possible somebody could have drove a snow machine in your backyard and put it there. But the question is, how often does that happen?
Right.
And how often does snowing happen?
Yeah.
Right. I think
what Tad pointed out to me that I also think sometimes I've overlooked or not put enough weight into is when a person tells one person one thing and another person another thing. Why? And what is that? And that has to be highlighted in these cases as well. Yeah, why is the husband saying, well, she ran off here, or she had a boyfriend or whatever, and then he's saying something else to somebody else. And so I think those are really important to focus on and to highlight that makes no sense if you have nothing to do with the disappearance.
Right. And what's your motive to tell this person this version of the story? And what's your motive, or what fact does this person know that would have made this other story completely implausible?
Yeah. The truth does not change.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting thing too, because people could lie for reasons that are we see it happen all the time, where people lie for reasons that have nothing to do with, let's say, committing the crime. They're trying to hide some other thing, or they're embarrassed by something, whatever. But I thought Bob made a really good point about when we were discussing Ashley's case. Why would you hold on to lies is also important. Like most lies, I stole, I don't know, a treat out of the pantry. When I show you on the videotape that I have from my Nest camera that here you are, you're going to give it up usually, right? But why people hold on to lies too also is kind of, in this case and beyond that, I thought that was sort of an interesting thing to think about, that
Because it's working for him. That's what I think Bob says, working for him,
right.
That's why you hold on to
Like,
the
why
lie.
wouldn't I?
Yeah, exactly. And you can be called a liar as many times, but it's still working for you. So it's when it doesn't work is when the lie changes. So I think, but that's a good point. Like, why hold on to something? Well, because it's working.
Yeah. I have this, we didn't talk about this on the podcast, I think in part because I hadn't gone back and listened to it. But when I went out to Montana last year and Kimberly and I saw Sam, that's a really nice way to put the way the conversation went. But I was listening to the tape, and it was just very hard to listen to afterwards. So I set it aside for a while, but I was listening to the tape again last week, and it just killed me because I was listening to the tape and I'm like, the first words out of his mouth are literally the opposite of what he said on Payne and Lindsay's podcast. The last words out of his mouth are literally, Kimberly says something to him along the lines of, you told Payne Lindsay on Up and Vanished, or no, she didn't say that part. She said, you said that Ashley told you she was pregnant and you thought it was, or she thought it was, you were the father. And he literally, like, instantly says, I never said that. I've never said that. And Kimberly says, it's on a recording. And without like missing a beat, he then says, oh yeah, she told me because she was looking for a father for the baby. And I was like, you lie so effortlessly. So effortlessly. I mean, we're talking like a minute stretch between all those things happening. And I'm like,
Yeah.
how do you rack up so many lies in such a short period of time without like acknowledging them at all? I'm like, this whole lying thing is definitely working for you. And I see why.
And he's fairly smooth at it.
Yeah. I think this is a great place to stop for today. We'll be back next week with part 2. Thank you for joining me and Julia. If you'd like to join us for more discussions with me and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, you can also join us at our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you guys all again next week.